Here we are. I had some people ask me the other day about trust, especially in this age of uncertainty. And it's such an important question. I wanted to get to it. So let's look at that. Um, Following on what I talked about last week, or actually it was Monday, about Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. One of the things he says is that very first stage is of trust versus mistrust. And if we didn't have an early childhood of being able to trust and having people around us that enable trust in the world, in the safety of the world, in our caregivers, in life, we grow up with a sense of mistrust. And this timeline is from 11 months to 18 months. So it's a pretty narrow timeline. The other piece is not only is it a narrow timeline, it's also very early, which means that we don't have the cognitive structure to understand what's going on and make sense of it. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. So what's getting laid down is not a narrative, not something we can think in language, but a felt experience of mistrust. And this is one of the great dilemmas of people who didn't have good attachment growing up, suffer from childhood emotional neglect, feeling lost, confused, where trauma doesn't resolve. Because how do they trust? So this is a huge, huge dilemma of how do we begin to trust? How do we know the signals inside of when I can trust and when I can't? How do I shut off the signals inside myself that say this isn't a good thing? And a lot of that happens through fear and anxiety that comes up, right? All those early feelings, those more primitive feelings, we can call them, come in and take over, and we feel lost and confused, disoriented. So that's really important to think about is what do I need to know that I can trust? How do I know that I can trust? What tells me that I can trust now in this moment? That means I need to discern this present moment from the past. So here's one of the dilemmas that as it ties into our reactivity and when we get triggered. So this, I wanted to tie it into anger because in the Safely Embodied community, we're doing some discussion around what is anger and how do we deal with anger. And one of the things that happens with anger is if I don't trust having that energy in my body, I'm going to get victimized by it. I'm going to get overly reactive. It's going to blow out in my relationships outside of me. I'm going to blow out inside of myself. I'm going to implode inside of me. So these different things happen. Now, what I want to do is look at, if we use the parallel lives model, is one of the ways to grow up through that or make that shift is that if I'm angry here in 2020, right? Remember, this is now 2020, and this is the past. And if I had experiences in my past that tucked away in these time capsules of a lot of activation of different ways, this anger in this moment is going to trigger any one of these, right? And if we're not dealing with them, if we're not attuning from here to there, this is going to blow up into the present moment, right? That's what we talk a lot about in the Becoming Safely Embodied Skills, is that's what happens with that triggered material. So if I'm here and I'm learning to trust my experience, I'm learning to turn into my signals and feel like, oh, okay, whoops, I'm giving this person 3 legs. That there's so much activation, but I can learn how to hold it inside my skin. That's what I want to do, is be able to let this energy move up and out through me without getting trapped in me, right? So all that energy is coming up into my body, and I can actually let it, what we talk a lot about, rise, crest, and fall. So important to do that. But why doesn't that happen? Have you ever been in the situation where you implode around your anger, you use substances or ways of being, you have different strategies to manage all that anger coming up. Part of the reason is we never learned how to do it in the past. So our task is, how do we stay and become a solid, steady, safe person inside ourselves so that we can be with what goes on inside? That is what is essential. So I can be with this. So then if this is, let's see if I have do I have a red marker somewhere in here? If that is overwhelming me, then I can learn how to be with it. I can, instead of getting overwhelmed by it, right? I can dip my thimbleful in there and just get a little tiny speck of this, bring it up and digest it. Let that little speck come up, rise, crest, and fall. Then I can integrate it. I can, instead of being overwhelmed by it, it actually moves through. The way that we do that is we stay here in the present moment and say, what am I angry about? This is a protest, right? Anger is a protest. There's something inside of me that's saying it shouldn't be like this, right? That is always what anger is. Somehow our system, somewhere deep inside, knows it shouldn't be like this. Right? So we need to listen to that protest, attune to it. Instead of acting it out, we need to be aware of it, listen to it with our inner ear, with our writing, with people around us, not dumping our protest, not dumping our reactivity, but staying solid inside. What is the protest? And then see, well, what am I needing, right? What am I needing in this moment? What did I need back then? There's two different answers to that. And since there are many parts of us involved, there might be many more different layers of needs. This part might need calming and soothing. This part might need to be heard and validated. So there are going to be different needs, but we have to attune. If we stay caught in the protest and we just keep acting it out instead of letting it transform in and through our body, it's going to activate ourselves even more. It's going to activate the people around us. So we need to be in practice around that, being with that. Now, I wanted to say something else about it. What tends to happen is anger here because it's getting metabolized inside the system instead of exploding outside or imploding in, it actually can be a force for good. And what can happen is that anger then gets metabolized as power. We can feel the sense of power inside our body, right? So that anger then actually can be held and allowed to move in and through and becomes a powerful source. It's a motivator. It's not a debilitator. It's a motivator. So what happens where anger then gets caught and looping, or where we feel like a victim to it, where we feel trapped in it, is when it stays stuck down here. And instead of us staying here attuning to this, it's like we get trapped into that old dynamic, that old pattern, and we start responding to life from here. But life, the people in our lives, they're not here. They're not in the past with us. They're here. So it's going to be confusing and disorienting for them, and we're not going to get our needs met. That's the most important thing, right? We don't get our needs met that way. So if we get caught in the swirl of that anger and we blow it out outside, and we don't learn how to take just a small bit at a time, a thimbleful at a time, learn how to let that move and let it become a power, a motivator, a chance to feel our own strength. In psychology, we call it self-agency. It's going to allow us to have that sense of power to move forward. That's where it becomes useful. We can change ourselves, change our world in that place. If we get stuck in this place, the anger tends to get caught in a loop and trap us inside. So here's sorry, I drool all over it. Does that make sense? I want to hear from you guys and know, was this helpful? Was it not? And this is the kind of thing I'm going to be going into in more detail in a short course I'm going to be doing, actually. What is it? I have to remember what the... So that's going to be a short course called dfay.com. It's going to be Leave Your Triggered Life Behind. So I wanted to let you know about that. And Sunil is saying, oh, thank you. There's so many ways of getting trapped with anger, especially with social media now these days. And going externally can stop us from really listening to the anger. Isn't that the truth? Right? Isn't that the truth? Sunil's making a really important point. How do we actually listen to that? That means we have to be able to stay inside our own body, our own skin, and let that information go through. But we can't do it if we're overwhelmed. That's why we need to slow things down and only take a little bit at a time. And that takes training, right? That takes a lot of training to slow things down and do a little bit at a time so we can actually let it rise, crest, and fall and move through us. So, yeah, Jenny's saying that makes so much sense with so many emotions. When we get stuck in the past, the people around us aren't there, so we don't get our needs met. That suddenly makes so much sense. Thank you. Oh, Jenny, I'm so glad, thrilled to hear. It's about taking it slow, one little bit at a time. We actually get to the goal, which is feeling better about ourselves and our life and having a better life, when we take it slow along the way. But there are really small, discernible steps that we can take, and that is part of the thing that we need to do, is learn how to take something big and break it down into small, digestible steps so that we can take those steps one step at a time. Right? So that is so important. Instead of getting swamped with how big it is, how do we slow it down and break it down? I was just on a call with those in the Transformational Academy, and we were looking at a situation with somebody's client and breaking it down into small bits so that something can be accomplished. It doesn't work any other way. And that's been a powerful thing to learn, that I've learned from the child attachment people, the child development folks, who really talk about breaking things down. Like Carlin Lyons Ruth talks about scaffolding, small little steps, right? So we want to do that. Liz Means in the UK and Scotland talks about very much the same thing. How do you take a task, make it small enough so that a child can learn how to take that step instead of getting overwhelmed and swamped? So that's what we're doing with life. That's what we're doing with healing, is break it down into small steps. And that's what I'll continue to do. And I'll be doing it in the short course. Leave your triggered life behind. You know, it's really about how do you have a better life? How do you have the life that you want instead of getting trapped in it? So, my friends, I love sharing this with you. And let me know how I can keep helping you. And one step at a time, we're all going to get there, moving through the uncertainty, the chaos, and the confusion. But also, we build trust in ourselves. If you didn't have trust growing up, that doesn't mean that you can't have it now. We can learn those small steps to have that trust inside so that we can do what Erik Erikson talked about, is take the steps and move through it, building that trust inside ourselves one step at a time. All right, my loves. May you have a good rest of the day, and I look forward to being with you in whatever way is next. Hopefully in the course. Hopefully you'll join me in the course. If not, I'll see you next week. I'll be here. I might even be here on Friday because there's so much I want to say around all this. But we'll keep at it, one step at a time. All right. Love you. Bye.